The wagon train had stopped before dawn when the desert air was still cool enough to sting the skin. She woke to the sound of hushed voices and the creak of leather, her body heavy and unresponsive beneath a thin, dirt-stained blanket. For days, fever had blurred her sense of time. Faces swam in and out of focus, some hard with impatience, others avoiding her eyes altogether. She understood what was happening before anyone said the words aloud. They were leaving her behind. She tried to sit up, but her limbs refused to obey. The sickness had drained her strength, turning even breath into effort. Dust clung to her lips, cracking them when she tried to speak. "Please," she managed, the word barely more than air. No one answered. The settlers moved with practiced efficiency, as if abandoning a human being were no different from discarding a broken wheel or a lame mule. She remembered how it began, how she had joined the wagon train with hope stitched into her chest like a fragile promise. The West had been sold to her as a place of new beginnings, where hardship was temporary and reward inevitable. But illness had made her a burden, and burdens had no place on the frontier. Progress demanded sacrifice, and she had been chosen as the cost. When they lifted her from the wagon, the ground felt shockingly cold against her back. The sky above stretched wide and merciless, pale with the coming sun. Someone placed a small tin cup of water near her hand and a scrap of bread wrapped in cloth. It was meant to look like mercy. It only made the abandonment feel more final. The wagon wheels began to turn. One by one, the shapes that had once meant safety and belonging rolled away, shrinking into the horizon. She watched until the dust swallowed them whole. Silence rushed in, heavy and absolute, broken only by the faint whistle of wind through dry grass. Fear settled slowly like a weight pressing down on her chest. Out here alone, the land felt endless and indifferent. She had heard stories of heat that killed without warning, of animals that watched patiently for weakness, of people who vanished and were never spoken of again. She wondered which fate would claim her first. As the sun climbed, the desert revealed its cruelty. The cool air burned away, replaced by a relentless heat that pressed against her skin. Her throat tightened with thirst, and the tin cup lay just beyond her reach. She dragged herself an inch at a time, each movement sending sparks of pain through her body. When her fingers finally touched the cup, it tipped over, spilling precious drops into the sand. She sobbed then, not loudly, but with the quiet despair of someone who knew there would be no second chance. Time lost meaning. The sky shifted from pale blue to blinding white, then slowly toward gold. Flies gathered, drawn by stillness. She waved them away weakly, her strength fading with the light. Hallucinations crept in, shadows that looked like people. Voices carried on the wind that whispered her name. She thought she saw her mother once, standing just beyond the rocks, arms open. When she blinked, there was only stone and sky. By evening, the cold returned, sharp and unforgiving. Her body trembled uncontrollably, fever fighting chill. She curled inward, trying to make herself smaller, as if that might protect her from the vastness around her. Above her, stars began to appear, bright and countless, uncaring witnesses to her suffering. She believed this was how her story would end, not with meaning or memory, but with quiet erasure. Left for dead, unnamed by the land that would claim her. As her eyes closed and darkness pressed in, she let go of hope, unaware that unseen eyes were already watching from the distant ridges, and that her fate had not yet been sealed. Long before she stirred again, she was no longer alone. From the high ridge overlooking the dry wash, the Apache scout had been watching the wagon train since first light. He had tracked them for 2 days, reading their passage in broken brush, crushed grass, and the deep scars their wheels cut into the earth. Settlers moved loudly, carelessly, as if the land belonged to them simply because they crossed it. He followed not out of hatred, but duty. His people needed to know who entered their territory and why. When the wagon stopped and voices rose in sharp, impatient tones, he slowed his approach. He crouched among the rocks, eyes narrowed, body still as the stone around him. He saw them lift something from one of the wagons, not a crate, not an animal, but a woman. Even from a distance, he could tell she was weak. Her head lolled against a man's arm, her body limp as they laid her on the ground. The scout felt a tightening in his chest as the wagons began to move again. He waited. Experience had taught him patience. Settlers sometimes returned, sometimes watched to see if wolves or raiders would do what they were too afraid to finish themselves. Only when the last wagon disappeared into the shimmering horizon did he descend the ridge. He approached cautiously, scanning for danger, for hidden men or circling predators. The land was quiet, but not empty. When he reached her, he knelt a few paces away, studying her without touching. Her skin was pale beneath the dust, her breathing shallow and uneven. Fever burned in her, evident even without laying a hand upon her brow. She smelled of sickness, sweat, and fear. She was close to death. Apache law did not demand her rescue. She was not one of his people. She was a settler, part of those who kept coming, taking, pushing deeper each season. Leaving her would have been easy, sensible, even. Yet as he watched her struggle to lift her hand toward the overturned cup, something in him resisted turning away. He saw not an enemy, but abandonment, weakness cast aside, a life treated as expendable. He rose briefly, scanning the horizon once more. There was no time. Vultures would find her by morning. The cold night would finish what the heat had begun. Decision made, he moved quickly. He removed his water skin and poured a small amount between her cracked lips. She coughed faintly, eyes fluttering open just enough to reveal fear before slipping shut again. He did not speak. Words would only frighten her. Instead, he wrapped her carefully in his blanket, lifting her with practiced strength. She weighed little, too little, like someone already half gone from the world. He carried her into the rocks, choosing paths that left no clear trail. He knew a narrow canyon where water sometimes pooled and where his people had once camped during lean seasons. It was sheltered from wind and hidden from wandering eyes. There, she would have a chance small, but real. As he walked, memories surfaced unbidden. His own sister, lost years ago during a harsh winter, found too late. The thought hardened his resolve. He would not pass death by again if his hands could prevent it. By the time the sun dipped low, he reached the canyon. He laid her gently in the shade, propping her head, wetting her lips again. He built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke low and thin. As darkness fell, she woke to unfamiliar stillness. Not the empty silence of abandonment, but something quieter and more contained, like the land itself was holding its breath. Her first sensation was shade cool, protective, a blessing after the merciless sun she remembered. For a moment, confusion wrapped around her thoughts, thick and disorienting. She expected to see endless sky. Instead, rock walls rose around her, streaked with rust and gold, narrowing the world into a sheltered hollow. Panic followed swiftly. She tried to sit up and cried out as pain lanced through her body. The sound echoed faintly against stone. Almost immediately, movement stirred nearby. A figure stepped into view, tall and still, dark hair tied back, eyes sharp and unreadable. He did not rush toward her, nor did he reach for a weapon. He simply watched, like someone gauging whether a startled animal would bolt or bite. Her breath came fast. "Please," she whispered, the word instinctive, torn from her before fear could stop it. Images flooded her mind, stories told in hushed voices around campfires, warnings meant to keep women obedient and afraid. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, shrinking back against the rock. He spoke then, low and measured, in a language she did not understand. The sounds were calm, steady, not sharp with threat. When she did not respond, he raised both hands slowly, palms open, a universal sign of peace. He crouched a short distance away, careful not to crowd her. Understanding came in fragments. He was the one who had moved her, the one who had given her water, the one who had carried her away from the place where she had been left to die. That knowledge did little to ease her fear. They regarded each other warily, two people divided by language, history, and expectation. She saw him take in every detail, her torn dress, the fever flush of her cheeks, the way her hands shook when she tried to steady them. He saw her see him, saw the fear flicker in her eyes, and something tightened in his chest. He placed a small bundle on the ground between them and nudged it closer with his foot. Inside was food simple, dried, unfamiliar. He tore off a piece and ate it himself before offering her the rest. A gesture of trust, of safety. Hunger won out over fear. She took the food with trembling fingers, eating slowly, carefully, half expecting the world to tilt beneath her again. It did not. Strength returned in faint whispers, just enough to keep her awake. As the hours passed, he remained near but never too close. He tended the fire, checked the sky, listened to sounds she could not hear. She began to notice the gentleness in his movements, the way he treated the land as something alive and watchful rather than something to conquer. With that realization came shame. She was part of those who had crossed into this world without asking, who had taken and taken again. Yet she was also the one they had discarded when she became inconvenient, caught between two worlds belonging fully to neither. Night fell cool and quiet. Stars appeared above the narrow slice of sky, sharper and brighter than she had ever seen. She hugged her knees to her chest, exhaustion pulling at her, fear still coiled tight but loosening its grip. She spoke her name softly, unsure why, as if saying it aloud might keep it from being lost. He did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. After a moment, he spoke his own name, placing a hand against his chest. Names passed between them like fragile bridges. She lay back against the stone, listening to the steady rhythm of his presence nearby. For the first time since the wagons had rolled away, she slept without expecting death to claim her before morning. Yet even in rest, she knew nothing was settled. She had been spared, but she was no longer who she had been. Between the world she came from and the one she had awakened into, she hovered, uncertain, wary, and very much alive. The danger came with the wind. It arrived first as a shift in the air, a subtle change the scout felt in his bones before sound ever followed. He rose from his crouch near the fire, eyes lifting toward the ridgeline. His body went still, every sense sharpening. She noticed the change immediately, the way his shoulders tightened, the way his gaze fixed outward, alert and calculating. Fear stirred in her again. "What is it?" she asked, though she knew he could not understand the words. He held up one finger, signaling silence, then gestured for her to stay low. She obeyed without question, pulling the blanket close as she pressed herself against the cool stone. From somewhere beyond the canyon, faint voices drifted, men speaking English, settlers. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. They hadn't come back for her, she realized. They were moving through the land, careless and loud, unaware of how exposed they were. Still, if they found her here, alone with him, the outcome would be unpredictable at best, deadly at worst for both of them. The scout weighed his options quickly. If the men were ordinary travelers, they might pass by. But if they were hunters or scouts, they would notice signs of recent presence. A fire, footprints, movement. Apache custom was clear. A woman claimed by a man, especially one declared as a wife, fell under his protection. To harm her would be an act of war. Without such a claim, she was vulnerable to judgment, misunderstanding, and violence from both sides of the world she stood between. He turned back to her, his expression grave but steady. He spoke firmly now, words flowing with intent. She understood none of the language, only the weight of the moment. He placed his hand over his heart, then pointed to her, then to the ground beneath them. He repeated a single word slowly, deliberately, as if carving it into the air between them. She didn't know the word, but she felt its meaning. Wife, her breath caught. Shock rippled through her, followed swiftly by confusion and fear. Marriage claim ownership. Everything she had ever known recoiled at the idea. She shook her head weakly, panic flashing across her face. He saw it and immediately lowered himself, making himself smaller, less threatening. He touched his chest again, then lifted 2 fingers, holding them side by side. Together. Protection. He drew a circle in the dirt around them both, then pressed his palm firmly into the center. The days that followed settled into a fragile rhythm. With the immediate danger past, the canyon became something more than a hiding place. It became a classroom. Each morning, the scout rose before the sun, moving quietly so as not to wake her. She watched him from beneath the blanket, studying the deliberate grace of his movements. Nothing he did was wasted. Nothing was rushed. When her strength allowed, he gestured for her to follow. Their lessons began with water. He showed her how to read the land for signs most people overlooked, the darker shade of soil that hinted at moisture beneath, the way certain plants leaned toward hidden seepage, the shallow tracks of animals that knew where life could be found. When he uncovered a small pool between rocks, her awe was genuine. She had crossed this land believing it empty, only to learn how wrong she had been. Food came next. He taught her which roots could be dug safely, which berries to avoid, how to grind seeds between stones until they became something nourishing. Her hands blistered quickly, unused to the work, but she did not complain. Pain meant progress. Progress meant survival. Language followed in small, careful steps. He taught her simple words: water, eat, safe. She repeated them, clumsy at first, earning a rare, fleeting smile when she succeeded. In return, she offered him English words, pointing to objects, repeating herself until understanding flickered in his eyes. Each shared word felt like a bridge laid stone by stone across a widening gap. At night, they sat by the fire, the silence between them no longer sharp. He told stories with gestures and expression hunts, seasons, loss. She listened, filling in meaning where language failed. When she spoke of her past, her voice trembled. She told him about the wagon train, the promises she had believed, the moment she realized she was being left behind. He listened without interruption, his jaw tightening as if holding back anger not meant for her. Slowly, fear loosened its grip. She learned to walk without stumbling, to sleep without waking in panic, to meet his gaze without flinching. The claim he had made lingered unspoken between them, a shadow and a shield all at once. He never touched her without permission, never demanded anything beyond her effort to heal and learn. In his restraint, she found trust. The land, too, began to change in her eyes. What had once seemed hostile now felt stern but fair. It rewarded attention. It punished carelessness. Under his guidance, she discovered her own resilience. Each small victory finding water on her own. Preparing a meal that didn't burn rekindled the sense of worth she thought she had lost forever. One evening, as the sun bled red across the canyon walls, she surprised herself by laughing. The sound startled them both. It felt foreign in her throat, but real. He looked at her then, truly looked, not as a burden or a responsibility, but as a woman standing on her own feet. That night, as the fire died low, she realized something profound had shifted. She was no longer merely surviving because someone allowed it. She was surviving because she was learning how, and with every shared step, every exchanged word, the space between protection and partnership grew thinner, shaping a future neither of them had planned, but both were beginning to imagine. The past did not release her easily. It came to her in the quiet hours, when the fire burned low and the canyon slept. Dreams carried her back to the wagon train, the creak of wood, the smell of dust and sweat, the way faces turned away when she begged. She would wake with her heart racing, breath trapped in her chest, the old terror clawing its way back to the surface. He noticed. One night, when she startled awake with a sharp cry, he was at her side in an instant, not touching, not crowding, just there. He spoke softly, a steady stream of words meant to calm. She didn't understand them, but the tone wrapped around her like a blanket. Slowly, her shaking eased. When morning came, she surprised herself by speaking. Her words came haltingly at first, tangled by emotion and the effort of being understood. She pointed west, mimicking the movement of wagons, then pressed a hand to her chest, her fingers curling into a fist. She acted out sickness, weakness, then the turning away, the finality of being left behind. Her voice broke when she reached that part, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. He watched in silence, his expression darkening with each gesture. When she finished, he remained still for a long moment, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the ground as if holding back a storm. Then, slowly, he began to speak. His story came not in full words but in fragments of memory shaped by motion and expression. He spoke of soldiers, of land taken piece by piece, of promises broken as easily as dry twigs. He touched his chest and then held up fingers, folding one down, then another family member's lost. A sister who had fallen ill during a harsh winter, help that never came. A body found too late. Grief passed between them, unspoken but deeply understood. In that shared pain, something fragile yet powerful took root. She was no longer alone in her suffering, and he was no longer carrying his losses in silence. Their stories intertwined, not because they were the same, but because they echoed one another. That day, when they walked the canyon together, she noticed how he paused at certain places, stones, trees, bends in the land, each holding memory. She realized the land was not just survival to him, it was history. Every step carried the weight of what had been lost and what still needed protecting. Later, she did something she had not done. The canyon could not protect them forever. When the scout returned one afternoon with news carried in his posture alone, she sensed the shift immediately. His steps were heavier, his gaze scanning the ridges more often than before. Change was coming of that she was certain. By dusk, they were no longer alone. Members of his people approached quietly, emerging from the land as if shaped from it. Men, women, and children alike regarded her with measured curiosity. No open hostility showed, but neither was there welcome. She stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly, feeling the full weight of being an outsider. Words were exchanged she could not understand, their cadence sharp, questioning. More than once, eyes flicked toward her, then back to him. The claim he had made to the settlers, to the land itself, had traveled ahead of them. Now it had to be answered for. An elder stepped forward, his presence commanding without force. He studied her closely, then turned his gaze to the scout. The conversation that followed was long and intense. The scout spoke with restraint but conviction, gesturing toward her, then to the land, then to his own chest. He spoke of protection, of honor, of responsibility. He did not look away. She understood little of the words but everything of the stakes. Finally, the elder turned to her. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. He spoke slowly, using gestures to bridge the language gap. He pointed to the path leading back toward the settler lands, then to the Apache camp. Choice. Her heart pounded. She could leave. Find her way back to the world she had come from, if that world would even take her. Or she could stay under a claim that had begun in necessity and grown into something complicated and deeply personal. She looked at the scout. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He did not claim her again. He waited. In that silence, she realized the truth. He had saved her life. He had taught her to survive. He had shared his pain and honored her boundaries. But now, the decision had to be hers, or the claim would mean nothing. She stepped forward. With trembling hands, she pressed her palm to her chest, then pointed to the ground at her feet. She mimicked the act of working, of learning, of standing beside him. Finally, she placed her hand lightly on his arm, asking, not taking. A murmur passed through the gathered people. The elder watched her closely, then nodded once. The test was not over, but it had begun. The scout exhaled slowly, tension easing from his shoulders. He spoke again, briefly, bowing his head in respect to the elder. Conditions were set time, observation, proof of intention. She would remain under his protection, but her place would be earned, not assumed. As the group dispersed, she felt the weight of what she had chosen settle fully upon her. There would be no easy path forward, no guarantees. Only effort, humility, and resilience. But as she walked beside him toward the campfire lights in the distance, she felt something she had not felt since before the wagon train: purpose. The claim had been tested, and it had held, not by force or fear, but by choice. And that made all the difference. Life among the Apache unfolded slowly, measured not in days but in seasons and shared effort. She was watched not unkindly, but carefully. Every movement, every mistake, every success became part of a quiet evaluation. She understood this without being told. Trust, once broken so many times in her life, would not be given freely here. She worked. She gathered water with the women at dawn, her shoulders aching beneath the weight of clay vessels. She learned to prepare hides, to tend fires so they burned clean and steady, to listen more than she spoke. At night, exhaustion pulled her into deep sleep, the kind earned honestly. No one treated her as fragile. That, more than anything, restored her sense of worth. The scout remained near but never overbearing. He guided when asked, corrected gently when needed, and stepped back when she found her own way. Their bond shifted subtly. What had once been necessity grew into companionship, shaped by shared silence as much as shared labor. One evening, as they sat apart from the others, she spoke to him in broken phrases, words from both languages, stitched together with effort and intent. She told him she was not staying because she had nowhere else to go. She was staying because she wanted to. The truth of it surprised her as much as it did him. He listened carefully, eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he nodded once, slowly, as if sealing something sacred. He touched his chest, then gestured to the space between them, not possession, but connection. Yes, the realization settled quietly between them. The claim that had once been a shield had become something chosen. Later, she was called before the elder again. This time, the questioning was gentler. She was asked to demonstrate what she had learned, to show respect for customs, to speak, however imperfectly, her intentions. Her voice shook, but it did not fail. She chose to remain, not as a captive, not as a debt repaid, but as a woman who had found belonging where she least expected it. When the elder acknowledged her decision, approval passed through the gathered people like a warm current. It was not celebration, but acceptance, the kind earned through patience and humility. That night, she and the scout stood beneath a wide, the past returned on a line of dust. She saw it first from the rise above the camp wagons moving slowly, familiar in their shape and sound, cutting across the land with the same careless certainty as before. Her stomach tightened. Even before she recognized the markings, she knew. The memory of abandonment rose sharp and immediate, as if no time had passed at all. The scout followed her gaze. His expression hardened, not with surprise, but with resolve. Word traveled quickly through the camp. Voices lowered. Movements became deliberate. This was Apache land, and strangers did not pass through unnoticed. The elder ordered calm, but readiness settled over everyone like a held breath. She stood at the edge of it all, torn between fear and something stronger. These were the people who had left her to die, the ones whose backs she still saw when she closed her eyes at night. Part of her wanted to disappear, to let the land swallow her again and spare her the pain of facing them. But another part stronger now refused. She stepped forward. The scout moved with her, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her. That choice mattered. It told her, and everyone watching, that she would not be hidden away. When the settlers reached the camp's boundary, confusion spread across their faces. They had not expected resistance nor recognition. One man's eyes widened when he saw her. "You're alive," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. She met his gaze without flinching. "Yes," she replied. Her voice was steady, stronger than she had ever heard it. "You left me to die." Murmurs rippled through both groups. The man stammered excuses, sickness, danger, necessity, the same hollow words she had once almost believed. She shook her head. "You chose to save yourselves, and I survived without you." The elder stepped forward then, his presence commanding silence. He spoke firmly, making the boundaries clear. This land was not open for passage without consequence. The settlers sensed it too. The balance of power had shifted. But the moment she would remember most was when the man who had poured water into her cup that morning stepped closer, guilt etched deep into his face. "We thought you wouldn't last the day," he admitted. She felt the truth of that settle not as a wound, but as a release. "I did," she said simply. There was nothing more she needed from them. No apology could erase what had been done. But standing there, alive and unbroken, she reclaimed what they had taken, her dignity, her voice, her worth. The settlers turned back soon after, their wagons rolling away once more, smaller this time. When the dust settled, it did not feel like loss. It felt like closure. As she walked back into camp, hands reached out light touches of acknowledgement, acceptance. She had faced her past and survived again. This time, not alone. The scout met her eyes, pride and respect clear in his gaze. The land felt steady beneath her feet. She had been left for dead once. Now she stood claimed by life itself. The land changed with the seasons, and so did she. What had once been a place of survival became a place of belonging. The camp no longer felt temporary, nor did she feel like a guest waiting to be sent away. Her hands knew the rhythms of daily life now, how to prepare food without being asked, how to recognize the shift in weather before the sky revealed it, how to move through the land with respect rather than fear. The union that followed was not marked by grand ceremony, but by quiet acknowledgement. A shared fire, words spoken before the elder, gifts exchanged that carried meaning rather than weight. When she stood beside him that day, she did so not as someone rescued, but as someone chosen and choosing in return. She took on a new name, one given by the women after watching her work and her endurance. It was not meant to erase her past, but to honor her journey. She carried both names within her, woven together like two paths meeting. Life was not without hardship. There were lean days, moments of doubt, nights when old fears crept back in the dark. But she was no longer alone in them. When grief surfaced, it was shared. When joy came, it was celebrated simply, honestly. Sometimes she stood at the edge of the land and looked toward the distant horizon where the wagons once disappeared. The memory no longer burned. It reminded her of how far she had come, of the woman who had been abandoned, and the woman who now stood whole. The scout, her husband, walked beside her then, as he always did. Not ahead. Not behind. Together. Their life was not built on a claim made in desperation, but on a promise forged through respect, resilience, and love. What began as survival had become purpose. She had been left for dead. Instead, she had been found. And in choosing a new path, she claimed a life richer and stronger than the one she had lost, rooted in the land honored by the people who had become her, family and guided by a love born not of fear but of freedom.